But if you're not making any money, especially I think this is very common in Latin America, I think joining a network is better than not joining one, because more opportunities are going to come your way.
What's it like to operate a podcast in another market? In a market where most people don't have an iPhone, Spotify is the consumption habit that most follow, content works differently, and the market as a whole is still trying to find its footing. That's exactly why I sat down with David Roemer, the head of Genuína Media, which focuses on Latin America. He started as a corporate lawyer in Mexico, launched his own podcast, and found himself almost accidentally building a network that's part agency, part aggregator, and by necessity, fully radically transparent about what it can and can't offer podcasters. Building a network that's part agency, part aggregator, and by necessity, radically transparent about what it can and can't offer podcasters. If this is your first episode, welcome. If you've listened to previous ones, thanks and welcome back. I'm Greg Wasserman, the host of this show, Podcast Network Insights. I spent 15 years in ad sales, and since 2021, I've been immersed in the podcast ecosystem. I believe that life is about time and relationships. I've spent a lot of time building relationships with every kind of podcaster, from solo creators just getting started to heads of industry-leading networks. If you've ever wondered whether joining a network makes sense, how these networks actually run, my goal is to give you a real look behind the scenes so you can confidently navigate your next move. Whether you're hosting your own show, work in production, handle sponsorships and advertising, or do yourself run a network. Draw your own conclusions and thoughts, make your own notes, but allow me to point you in this conversation to pay attention to how Genuína Media structures its creator deals. Notice what changes and sadly what stubbornly stays the same when you're building a podcast network in and for Latin America. Why video is mandatory, to how advertisers still need convincing, to the real constraints of market size and platform power. You'll hear how local context shapes every decision. If your understanding of how networks is shaped by US conventions, this conversation will expand your map. On that note, let's get into this conversation. So David, the show is called Podcast Network Insights. First question I always like to lead with is, when you hear podcast networks, what comes to mind?
Well, that's a great question. And thank you for having me, Greg. Yeah, I mean, I think when I think of podcast networks, I think of the meaning in the US, which is basically a conglomerate of different podcasts. And I say this because in Latin America, I'm from Mexico, podcast networks are also kind of agencies too. So there's really not a distinction. So basically podcast networks, there's no such thing as an agency, as a podcast agency in Latin America. They don't exist. So basically all of the agencies are publishers as well, or at least they distribute certain content. So yeah, it's a good question because I think about the two meanings. I don't know if that makes sense.
No, I mean, that's a great segue into the fact that you are in Latin America, that you're the first network I'm speaking to. And so it's a great way to understand the nuances, if we think about the global aspect of podcasting, to be able to bring, what you've been doing to the market and to get people then understanding beyond just what we here in the States are probably thinking of from a podcast network. Great answer. There's no wrong or right way to answer it. So I guess the next side to that is your background's not in podcasting. We take a step back here, right? Like, you started in the legal side of it. So as someone who's in Mexico that started a network, which is an agency, and it's a completely different, like, how did you get into the podcast world?
Yes. So, I mean, I studied law in Mexico, which is, it's different from the US because basically once you graduate like college, you're a lawyer. It's not like you have to go to grad school. So it's simpler. But yeah, I was a lawyer, like a corporate lawyer for a couple of years. And I always had a passion for podcasts. Well, always, I mean, like since Serial, I would say. And I was like pretty obsessed with what I could listen to. There was actually a podcast called More Perfect from Radio Lab. I don't know if you ever heard it, which is like a legal spin-off that I really enjoyed. And so basically that took me to start my own podcast with some friends, including my co-founder. It was called Tripeando, and we would basically interview cool people in Mexico, right? So we had our day jobs, and we had this podcast, which started to grow a lot by 2018 standards. And we actually had like a former president of Mexico in the podcast. Like it was pretty cool. And then it was just like the Gimlet era where they acquired a lot of Spotify acquired a lot of companies, and we saw a lot of future in the business. My co-founder Inigo, he was like, I think I want to do this. He's an economist, so we both had nothing to do with podcasting, and we wanted to produce like Gimlet, for example. But quickly we realized it was a very complicated business, and I think what was good for us is that we found out with our podcast that advertising was really hard in Latin America. We would listen to all of these podcasts in the US and they were full of ads, right? So we're like, okay, maybe there's an opportunity here. And I guess that was like the inception point.
So you went from your own original podcast to where was the pinnacle of, all right, let's become an agency. Let's actually become a network. And were you just creating shows, finding clients and producing it for them? Or was it just the advertising side of it?
No, so yeah, at first we had clients and we would produce for them. But at the same time, we were like, we really don't want to do this. This is too complicated. And we were doing like very boring shows about, I don't know, you can imagine like some bank who wanted to do a podcast and the CEO would be the host. Yeah, it was not very fun, but it really helped us to bootstrap. And from there, we were like speaking to bigger podcasts, to bigger creators in Mexico and other countries in Latin America. And that's when basically we started realizing, okay, nobody's making money here, which is crazy. I wish I could fast forward and say that things changed 180 degrees and now everybody's making a lot of money. Not the case, but there has been a lot of progress and we've been part of that wave, you could say.
So everyone that's listening to this, I'm going to butcher Spanish, but Genuína Media is the network, right? Pronounce it for us.
Yeah. It's Genuína Media, but we always say Genuína Media, like imagine genuine, like the word genuine, but as a female. Basically, we wanted to make like genuine content and I don't know why we added the A at the end to make it harder.
Keep it with the Latin vibes here. So if that was the case of why you guys ultimately have genuine content, you were looking at Gimlet as your idea of what kind of content you want to create, but you're also working in a market that's difficult. You're saying it hasn't changed too much. So is the content you're focused on built for just the Mexican market where you're based? Or have you been able to tap into the US and from creators who are here, Spanish speaking, that would love to reach the whole Hispanic community, that then your network is ultimately the place for it? Or it's more because of the advertising side, you're stuck within who wants to reach the, not the Hispanic community, but the Mexican community?
No, so I mean, we work a lot with Latinos in the US. They're such an important market. That's honestly how we started our advertising journey, because that's where most of the money would come from. But now we've expanded to Mexico and basically every other country in Latin America. We have basically worked with the biggest podcast in every country, including Brazil. And now we're actually working with Spain as well a lot and trying to expand. So basically, a lot of our focus has been to help US brands expand internationally or reach US Latinos.
So is the network, how much of it is you're producing the shows? How much of it is just aggregating the shows and providing in a sense, the advertising sponsorship component to it?
It's basically 90% aggregating shows. We do produce a few of our shows, but that's not too many for now.
So what has been the hardest thing getting advertisers to reach the, I guess, as you said, hasn't been a 180. You wish in the last 8 years it's changed. Why is it? Is podcasting's growing? What about it from the Latin Hispanic community has not reached that?
I mean, I think it's several factors. Just for starters, I mean, Mexico is a huge country, yes, but imagine it has like a lower GDP than California or Texas. Like for advertisers, it's an attractive market, but it's not. It's like, okay, let's expand internationally where we don't speak the language and it's like a whole different set of rules, and we can still tap into the US, right? So it hasn't been very obvious for us. It has also been like evangelization process where a lot of Mexican brands have also started to question themselves like, hey, what's up with podcast advertising? And we have been the ones who are like, hey, why don't you try it out with Genuína? And the cool thing is that we measure everything. I think we've had the opportunity to really adopt the best practices from the US, which has been kind of like a crystal ball for us. Like, oh, wow, this is how the market could look in the future in Latin America. So we really try to adopt what we learn all the time from US agencies and US networks and bring it to LATAM. The Mexican brands or local brands that have advertised with us, they get like a complete different experience from what they usually say is based, like for them it's equivalent to influencer marketing, right? But this is like completely different. It's different attribution, different metrics, and most of them have seen good results, so they come back, which is super important.
So if you're seeing not the 180 that you wanted in the expansion, if I was a podcaster who's going to be starting a podcast or already has one that's in Spanish, what would you say? Is there something that you're telling that podcaster like, hey, we're the right network for you to join because of X, Y, and Z? Or you're like, you're probably not going to want to join our network because whatever. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, we try to be very transparent with the podcasts we work with, especially in terms of the size, right? So if you're a podcast that doesn't have like the minimum downloads.
What's the minimum you see?
For us, it's about 50,000 per month.
Okay.
So it's not that much compared to, I think, some US networks, but it's still hard to get there. That's the only thing, why we do this is because if not, it's very hard for you to see any money, right? And some of the podcasts are going to have advertisements in their podcast when they click on them, and they're going to get like $30. So it's better to not have them sometimes, you know?
So besides the advertising side, like walk us through what is it that you guys do as a network? How do you support your creators? How do you even look for your creators beyond just the advertising?
Right. So, I mean, we always say that we are shooting at the same goal than this, like a soccer reference, than our podcasts, since we want them to grow and we want them to monetize, right? Because that's how it goes well for us as well. So I think something that's very important is that we are like one of the oldest, if not like the oldest network in Latin America. We know everyone at Spotify in LATAM. We know everyone at Apple Podcasts, you know. So we really push for the podcast inside our network to get traffic through those platforms, especially Spotify, since Spotify is king in Latin America. Very few people use Apple Podcasts. And we also run a pretty serious cross-promotion program. We also help some podcasts advertise and use basically paid advertisement for certain channels. And we basically understand how to grow a podcast when it comes to Spanish shows or Latin American shows. And I mean, the monetization, I think that's the biggest differentiator from us than any other network, right? Programmatic is one thing that you cannot get everywhere in Latin America. It's very hard still to monetize programmatically. So our focus is direct sales. That's how we call when a brand comes to us and they're like, hey, I'm looking for a campaign in Chile, and I want people that are interested in business and finance in Chile. So that's like very specific. And I think we understand what they're looking for, right? So we know basically all of the podcasts in Chile that have a certain size. We know how they work, like basically everything about them. And I think that's what gives it like a very genuine, apologies for the pun, like touch, right? It's like very, like you don't want a Mexican podcast advertising something about Chile, right? Because they're different countries, different cultures, whatever. No, maybe there could be like an example where you would want that, but like most of the times you don't. And I think a lot of people can get that confused, and you have to be like very intentional of the campaign you want to do.
So if I'm looking to join, I got the 50,000 downloads. If I'm a Spanish podcast based in America, you would want to look at joining your network, or no, it's got to be someone in the LATAM, the market.
No, not at all. I mean, actually, you can also be an English language podcast. We do push for Latino hosts, which I don't know if you are, Greg.
No, I may look it, but no.
You're in LA, right? Yeah. I mean, no, we do have some shows in English. I think like 15% of them, which are Latino hosted. So you can be basically anywhere. It doesn't really matter. And we always love to talk to podcasts. That's what I do all day. So if you go into our site and just like leave a form, we'll definitely contact you.
So what are you looking for? I guess anyone that's listening that's trying to understand, what are the red flags? What are the green flags that you are evaluating when you're deciding, is this show worth joining our network? Because from where I sit, and this is why I started this show, is I think about how many podcasters think that the idea of joining a network is a holy grail. They're like, oh, I've made it. They're going to help me grow. They're going to help me monetize, but they don't really understand all the questions that they should be considering when they're thinking, or why your network over any others. I mean, that's the other reason why this show exists, so we can shed light on your network, which everyone may not know, and they may thinking, I've got to go join this other network just because that's the only network they may know. So what are those red and green flags that you're evaluating new podcasters to join the network on?
Well, I really try to think about it in a very direct and transparent way with the podcast, because I understand I'm a podcaster myself, you're a podcaster. It's like a baby, right? So if a podcast is already making money and they're comfortable, they really should think about if joining a network is a good idea for them, right? Like, what are the opportunity costs they're leaving on the table? But if you're not making any money, especially, I think this is very common in Latin America, I think joining a network is better than not joining one, because more opportunities are going to come your way. And you might not make, if you're not that big, I mean, that's also very straightforward. If you're not that big, you're not going to make that much money. And something that's unfortunate, but I think it's real, well, at least in our case, is that the business model is to have a lot of podcasts, and we can mostly pay attention to the bigger ones, right? Because that's the one that are generating the most money. And sometimes that feels, for smaller podcasts, that like they're not getting the attention they require, and that's completely understandable. But that's just like how, like that's I think like the nature of how networks work in a sense. But yeah, I would say like if you're already making money, think about this. Like if you understand how to monetize already, you like already did like the most important steps, and get a deal that actually makes sense for you, right? Also, for example, I think we have like a very interesting model where we have no exclusivity with the podcasts. We're like, hey, we're going to bring you the campaign. If you want to take it, that's great. If you don't want it, no problem. And if some other agency brings you a campaign, that's all you and the other agency. Or if a brand reaches out to you directly, no problem, So we just want to add value, and we really want to take a take just a cut from the work we bring in, and that has been successful too.
So if I mean, you guys, and if anyone goes to their website, you'll see they're branded. Their podcasts have the network brand all over it. So you've got, as you said, bring them in. Even if you're already monetizing, join the network, because in that sense, what you guys are doing is from the cross promotion, helping from an audience growth. You're not just doing the monetization, but you're also allowing them to get monetization wherever they can get the monetization to fill, because I guess from what you're saying, it's a hard market. And if your sales team can't go and get all the sales for every show, at least this podcaster has the ability to get revenue wherever they're able to get revenue.
Yes, exactly. Just like you said, like worst case scenario, you're in the same position you were before joining the network, right? Like, it's your podcast, your content, your IP, and actually, like, if things are not working or you get a better deal, we do have an agreement, of course, but like we never work with a podcast when the podcast doesn't want to, you know, like we send the contract, take your podcast to the hosting site you were before. Like we want the podcast to be happy, you know, so that's also very important for us.
So how large is the network right now?
So we have over 230 podcasts right now in the network, like directly in, let's say, like in the hosting site or account of Genuína, but we work with a lot of other podcasts that we call partners. They're independent and they're bigger and they just like have their own setup.
So the 200 includes those others? No. All right. So you've got even more. So you're always are you always looking to add more shows? Or to your point, you're like, look, it's the 80-20 rule. We want the bigger shows. We'll keep adding, but just know what we're adding is it's hard to manage them all.
I mean, no, we're always trying to add more shows, but we're always trying to be very transparent. Like we're not like, as you mentioned, like some podcasts think that joining a podcast network is going to change their lives, and it could, but if you don't have the right size, or sometimes the content is very important, right? Like in Mexico, for example, business and investing are like, they sell super good, you know, but if you do true crime, a lot of brands are like, no, I don't want to get involved in that, right? So we really want to do like a very transparent diagnostic of the podcast, but we also want the stakes to be very low. Like, hey, try it out. If it doesn't work, you'll be back where you were and you already had the experience.
So what would you say, besides being, as your mind, the oldest LATAM, network, the model where you've got these exclusivities in terms of they're hosted with us, but you want to go ahead and sell. So where is it that you feel you guys excel when we compare the network landscape? Why have you modeled your business, or have you modeled it off of someone else? Or are you just kind of, we're doing what's right and we'll just keep pivoting as we go?
Yeah, I mean, for us, sales is the most important part, right? So the client is the brand for us. And I think that's sometimes hard to understand when it comes to networks. A lot of networks I've heard, they call their podcast clients, right? Which is interesting. But for us, the podcasts are like partners or providers in a way. And our client is the brand. And at the end of the day, that's what we try to protect the most. And there have been occasions for us where the brand is looking for a specific audience and we don't have it in the network. So we go to another network to try to find that. So it's, at the end of the day, we want the campaign to do well. And that can be a bit confusing because like the podcasts are partners in a sense, but they're not like the focus of what we do, right? The focus of what we do is selling campaigns.
So it's less about how do I help this podcaster grow or give them the resources for growth besides, I guess, podcast swaps and cross promoting with the network. But it's more of like our time and energy from what you guys do is let's go find brands. Let me go activate with our podcasters to close some sponsorship or ad deals. Is that it?
Yeah, that's that. We try to not, like I said, right? We really try to be transparent with the podcast, and we say, hey, we're we're going to try to help you grow, but that's not our focus. Our focus is making money for you and for us. And I think most of the podcasts appreciate like the no bullshit approach, because it's very hard to put on numbers. How are you going to help them grow? Sometimes they expect something and you disappoint. So for us, it has always been better. Like, we help in the commercial arm of your podcast. You focus on the content, and that has been like the best partnerships we have done. Like where we both understand the role,
Yeah, I get it. It's at the end of the day, it's sales. We're here to help you sell. We're gonna go find the brands that will drive everyone the revenue that we're all looking for. So the shows you're actually looking for would be shows that want to monetize. A good fit for your network to expand beyond the 200 is someone who's actually looking for a sales arm as opposed to any other form.
True, 100%.
So if you were to start your network differently today than you did previously, what would have changed? How would you have modeled it today, what you know now versus what you did, what was this, 4 or 5 years ago?
Yes. I mean, that's a great question because, I mean, of course, we've had a lot of mistakes during these 5 years, a lot. But I mean, because some podcasts have gone to competitors. I mean, we've always wondered, like, hey, maybe we should have had like stricter contracts or stuff like that. Especially me being like a lawyer, I mean, we really understood, I think, like from the beginning that we are a pretty small player when it comes to the podcast industry. Even in Latin America, we are completely bootstrapped. We never had like cash in hand. We started this from scratch, Inu and myself. So we had to grow basically on our word with the podcast, right? And I think for us, it has been very fun to create like these relationships with the podcast and bringing them a revenue, right? Because it really helps them to keep doing what they love and what they're good at. And if I had to start again, I would change like a million things. But I think the core of what we do and how we do it, I would keep it, because for us, it was never like, oh, you have to stay in Genuina because we have an agreement, or you have to do this campaign because we already got it for you. It's like, no, we understand it's your podcast. It's your content. We want help. And if we can't, that's okay.
You guys are just nice guys. We're here to just help you. We'll make money for everyone if you want it. If you don't, we'll find a better deal, or go find your own deal, right?
Yeah. Honestly, yeah. I mean, it sounds very nice like that, but yeah, like that's how we try to think about it,
No, I mean, I look at some of the conversations I've already had and we've recorded, haven't yet been released. It's just a matter of how many people in the network space, regardless of how they started their background, ultimately have commented in like, we're here to serve, we're here to help, we're here to give back. And that's kind of the arc that you're following along with others.
Yes. I mean, I think that's the most important thing. I think it's the second most important thing. The most important for 99.9% of the podcasts we work with is revenue. Like, they do care that you're nice and that you're responsive and that you try to grow the podcast. But if you're not bringing deals and they could get deals somewhere else, they're going to leave, right? So
how come you guys have focused only on I shouldn't say only, that trivializes it, but your big focus has been on sponsorships and ad deals and not going maybe in other monetization avenues, like taking IP in these shows and going like, okay, how do we help turn this show into, a TV show or a movie or whatever aspects there are? What has allowed you to just say, you know what, our focus is on the advertising side, and that's where we're going to keep the blinders on instead of going other monetization and growth engines?
And to be honest, it was just like a natural path for us because we had no money and producing is expensive. So we've always wanted to have owned and operated, and it's something we're looking for in the future, since I think we have a better understanding of what works and what doesn't and how to grow. but it has taken us a lot of time to be in a position where like, okay, maybe we can try it now. Because I think being an agency as we are has been the leanest way to do it as of now.
I mean, because at the end of the day, you're eating in a sense based on, can I sell ads? Can I, as opposed to like, all right, the production side, you've got, I look at how many agencies or networks, I should say, are like, all right, they've got the own and operate it. So they own that content. They're the production side of it. So maybe they can make the money there. But for the most part, while you do have a few shows, you're 200, you're on the ad side, right?
Yes. And I mean, it's amazing for some companies or networks to be able to produce their own shows. Especially, I think in the US, it makes way more sense if the show does well because you can make a lot of money. But in Mexico, just like producing a show, I mean, it can cost a bit less than it costs like producing it in the US. But if it doesn't do well, you lost all your money. You know, it's like if you do a TV show and nobody watches it, it's hard. It's a big bet. So you do have to have capital to invest, I would say, in producing.
Yep, the capital. It's always the money train, right? How do we do that, or how do we find? I have to go back to your comment, which I kind of joke on when you said it. Is like when you first doing, it's a corporate client who's a banker, and it was kind of boring, but in reality, like those are probably the clients that are paying you the money that allow you to get the capital to do, I guess, not the advertising side, but the train that you may want, right?
Yeah, I mean, for us, that example was what gave us the opportunity to start the agency, because at the beginning as well, we were making no money out of ads, right? It took us a while.
You need volume at that place. So you didn't have it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. You need a lot of volume and you need clients, and it's a journey. And we're producing podcasts for companies was our starting point. Actually, I think this year it's like after 5 years, we stopped producing for our first client, which was a bit sad, but it was like part of the natural process of the company, which was also exciting. Like, hey, we've been doing this because we love you and you were honestly helped us so much, but like we can't do it anymore, like it doesn't make sense for us. Yeah, so that has been also an interesting journey.
5 years, there you go. Well, I guess that shows I guess I could ask the question here. What is it that a podcaster, if I'm listening to this right now and I've got a podcast, or I'm thinking of starting a podcast, you've been podcasting for what, 7, 8 years? You've been doing the network for 4. What is it that I need to be doing to be successful?
I mean, I think now more than ever, you need video, which I think maybe you didn't need a few years ago. It's especially if you want to grow to a certain size. I think video is more important than ever. I think you need consistency. I imagine, Greg, that like so many people have come through the years and are like, hey, I'm starting a podcast. Like, what microphone do I need? And you're like, don't worry about the microphone. Like, what are you going to say, right? So really focus on the content and being consistent, because it really takes a long time. It looks way easier than it is. I know hundreds of podcasts that are in the podcast cemetery of ideas and of people that leave it after 3 months or 6 months. And that's the hard part for me. Like, are you going to be consistent? Are you going to be there every week? Do you love doing this without making any money? If not, I would rethink it.
So you led me to the standard question on video. So you guys have gone down video. You're not only just doing the audio shows. Most of your 200 shows have moved into video. Is that right?
Yes. I mean, to be fair as well, I would say that Latin America never saw a really big boom of audio only shows. Like, there was honestly never a serial in Latin America or something similar. Like, the bigger shows kind of always had video with them. So it's like very natural to Latin Americans. YouTube is king. over everything. Like people watch YouTube everywhere. And Spotify now, which people, I mean, in Latin America, most people have Android phones. So Apple Podcast doesn't exist. I know Apple Podcast will have video soon, but people watch video even on, I mean, I think more people watch video on Spotify in Latin America than in the US, at least like in percentage. So yeah, I think it's necessary. It's a requirement nowadays, especially for a conversational podcast.
And what do you see then from the advertising side?
From the advertising side, we're also seeing more interest in video. I think at the end of the day, you do want to leverage what you do on YouTube as well. So some of these podcasts are huge on YouTube. And I think having what's known in the industry as baked-in ads works very well. And you combine two different platforms, you're reaching two different audiences, and it's working very well. And also, we're seeing that Spotify is not allowing anymore for like dynamic ad insertion for premium users in a lot of countries. And like this is a trend they're going to keep doing. So if you have a premium subscription in Spotify, you will listen to less and less ads on the platform, and they're paying you like for a minute consumed on video, right? So that's really going to limit the ability to insert dynamic ads for networks or agencies like us, and baked-ins become more of an important tool.
That's an interesting piece. So I'd say, for at least for your market, if I was a advertiser listening to this right now, or if I was another network trying to understand, that piece sounds like that is a key market differentiation for the struggles that your network kind of has to go through. Or are you seeing that would be regardless?
Yes, I mean, we are trying to figure out how to work through this, because it has, I mean, I think the near future looks like a very big squeeze for agencies internationally, since Spotify is so powerful, right? Because this doesn't affect that much the US side of the business, because people are like, hey, at the end of the day, I have Apple Podcasts, right? But we don't. So I think our big push is for baked-in ads. I think we also have to see how to create own and operated, because like a lot of platforms, they want to skip networks like us. So it's interesting times, challenging times.
Where do you, I guess to that point, where do you see things going? If you were to crystal ball this, I hate the question, but the crystal ball, especially with video and Apple announcing their video, even though it's not big for your market, what's your crystal ball in the next few years within podcasts, but specifically since the show's about podcast networks, the podcast network realm?
I think Spotify is in a very tricky position. The idea of not having ads on Spotify podcast with video makes sense, but I don't think it's sustainable if the podcasts are not going to make the same amount of money they made with ads, right? So I think that's a big question, and I don't think they're going to be able to make it work, to be honest, because YouTube is moving in the other direction. YouTube announced they're adding dynamic ads to YouTube channels, which is basically what you already had on Spotify, and you will have on Apple Podcasts. You will always have on Apple Podcasts. So I think the near future is going to be very complicated because of this rollout of premium video. But I think like in the long term, Spotify is going to recalibrate. I think they will realize that advertising in podcasts doesn't really depend on them. It depends on the podcaster, and podcasts are free to listen to, and people should realize that you don't need a premium subscription to anything. They're free to listen to, and that's all the podcasters, most of them live through ads. Like Patreon is great, but also in Latin America, nobody really pays for Patreon. Like people are not used to paying for stuff that they already consider free. So listening to the ad and even buying the thing the host is advertising is the best way to help them and support them.
There's your soundbite right there, David. I mean, the fact that the majority of probably people that are listening to this are going to be in the States, myself included, and not knowing what you're seeing, the vision you've got from the market experience you've got is crucial to understand not only Apple and Spotify and YouTube, but the market, but the fact that you said creators, why am I going to come on there and create content if there's no way for me to make money? It's a hobby then, and why am I going to go ahead and just do the hobby if I can't, be a media company?
Right. And another question, like, why will I upload video to Spotify if they're not paying me the same, the money I should be getting, right? So I will only upload audio on Spotify, and I will send the video to YouTube where I am getting paid. Yeah, that's for us, that's like the biggest question in the upcoming months, maybe years.
So then would you shift more of your focus than just instead of just LATAM and go, all right, how do I get the Hispanic and Spanish speaking audience in the US? Because I know that is a larger market. That's a different beast in itself. And therefore there's actually, from your business standpoint, more income that you can be making, as it's clearly sounds like the business decisions that are out of your hand are squeezing you.
Right. I mean, we always wanted to work with Latinos in the US. It's a market we really understand. I live in the US. So part of the company is really focused on this. But we also really want Latin America to grow, right? And Mexico is a big market. So you could say that Mexico is a few years behind the US. But take other countries and they're like years behind Mexico. So I think like part of what we really want to do is spotlight Latin America, spotlight that there's a huge opportunity for advertisers to reach these demographics in a super cheap way where they basically have no competition. Like if you would be in Mexico, you would listen to very few ads or none, right? If you're in another country in Latin America, never. So if you're a brand and you put your name out there, people are going to be like, what's going on? What's happening? And they will be interested. And we've tried it and it works. So I think there's like an amazing opportunity still to develop.
So it's not only there's not a lot of ads based on what you described, but our consumers are, as we know, they're influencers. So our consumers that listen to podcast ads in the LATAM market converting, and you're able to go back to the advertiser. Look, there's like no ads in here, so you'll own this good content. You'll have the parasocial connection with the host and his audience, and these users will actually buy your product. Or it's just not okay, we were there, we spent this money, but where's the ROI?
No, I mean, for us, we always use I guess like the classic tools you listen to in the US. We always use Podscribe. We always use any analytics the brand needs. And we try to measure everything, right? So we never do a campaign without attribution metrics, which is like a practice very common in Latin America, where it was just like the classic, send me a screenshot of how many downloads the podcast had. And it's like, no, you're not going to come back with that information, right? And we want you to come back. So we've done campaigns like for very cheap or even free, like a few years ago, because we wanted brands to try it out. And it really works because you can get into amazing podcasts for 1/8 of the cost in the US. Like imagine, I mean, yeah, a podcast you really respect that you were like, you cannot imagine how much it costs in the US to get an ad from them, like Host Red. In Latin America, it's like the same perception of that person, but it's way cheaper, you know? So I say it's an amazing opportunity and it converts incredibly well.
There you go. If anyone is listening to this that's on the advertising side that wants to get into the LATAM market, I mean, not only does your agency set up for it, but there's a green grass ahead to do it, which I think is also exciting for podcasting as a whole. I mean, my background's in media sales, so I understand that, and we keep pushing about the $2 billion into podcasting. How do we make it a $5 billion? But it sounds like what you're doing, there's an entire green pasture ahead in the Latin market that you're a little behind, where the maturation of the US, but that's probably why you're so passionate about it and excited that, like, if I could just keep doing this, it's the same motion as a podcaster. Stay consistent, just keep grinding away, and we'll get there, and we'll just end up making more money in the market.
Yes, 100%. And as I said before, right? Because we've had the opportunity to see how the market has developed in the US, and we've taken the best practices and the best things we've learned back to Mexico and to Latin America. So we've learned from a lot of the mistakes that have been done in the industry, right? Without having to make the mistakes ourselves, which is great. And I think brands can have the trust and just like like the trust from an agency and work in Latin America at the same time, which is, I think, the value we add.
So one question that I always like to ask, it's a little off topic. What would be one podcast? It can't be your own, but it could be in your network that other people you really wish were listening to more of.
And so we have this Colombian podcast. The name is a bit hard. It's called Relatos Ñeros, and it's an exception to the rule I was saying because it's a narrative style podcast and just has like an amazing production, super immersive. It touches on very real Colombian stories. It's in Spanish, and it's one of those podcasts where I'm like, wow, like I'm very pleased that we represent this show because they do the hard work.
There you go. The other off-ball question is, what's one book that you recommend to people that's been either instrumental in your life or helped you from a business, whatever it could be? It could be business, personal, just one book that you would recommend to people.
That's a good question. I mean, I think fiction, I love this book called The Palace of Dreams. It's an Albanian author. Really recommend it. It's, I think, one of the best books I've ever read. Yeah, I think that one's like very instrumental. I also liked recently, I read Anti-Fragile. It's a nonfiction book, and basically the concept is very powerful. So I also recommend that one. Maybe you don't have to read the whole book. You can catch the drift at the middle of the book. But yeah, that one's good.
Thanks. We'll have those in the show notes. But I love those because podcast discovery is tough. So getting to talk to a podcast network and a podcaster as well is like, great. Here's a platform for discovery. I like the book one because everyone always complains like there's too many podcasts. Well, we never complain that there's too many books, and books, just like podcasts, they touch our lives in very unique ways. So thanks for sharing those. Well, I guess as we look at closing this out, is there anything else that you would want to add that I haven't asked you that you would want to share with an audience? I mean, you think about, we got podcasters, heads of networks, advertisers, just those in the industry that may either want to know about you, your market, or your network as a whole.
Yes. So, I mean, if you're interested in the Latin American space or US Latinos, please reach out. I honestly love to talk to podcasts, to networks, to whomever, and try to guide them. We are really in the effort of growing the industry as a whole. So everything we can do to help, even if it means like no revenue, or if you're a small podcast, let us talk, right? Let us be in the same network. Not in the podcast network necessarily, but like, let's stay in contact because opportunities arise. And yeah, like super excited where this is going.
I mean, I guess that goes to my belief that life is about time and relationships. So you have no clue where that conversation goes. You're like, hey, let's talk. Whether I can help you today or I help you in the future, at least we can be in each other's realms for where you're taking your network or where they're taking their podcast.
I completely agree. I mean, sometimes I speak to a show that's like super niche, just like randomly they tell me like what they're going through. And 2 days later, I speak to a brand and they're like, I want to get to this niche. I'm like, oh my God, I spoke to this person like 2 days ago. So yeah, I completely agree with what you said, Greg.
I mean, that's just for anyone that's listening, like that's a key piece. Like that's why I say I'll talk to anyone. You have no clue where a conversation, even if you've got the blinders on, no clue where your next conversation may lead you. Sometimes take those blinders off. Well, David, it's been a pleasure. I really appreciate you coming on. As we got to know each other a couple of years ago through podcast events, It's also what I love about going to different kind of events. You get the opportunity to meet people who are completely different countries that are doing and operating in the same realm. And we get to learn a little bit more about what you've built and where it's going. So thanks a lot.
On the contrary, thank you.
Well, you've made it this far. So allow me to give you my 2 cents in my conversation with David. As I said at the beginning, building a network in another market is hard. It's unique, it creates its own challenges and rewards. First, Latin America does not operate like the US podcast market. David kept stressing a podcast network there often functions more like an agency. Apple Podcasts barely matter in many cases. Spotify is the dominant player, and advertisers' behavior is still much less mature than the US. Second, Genuína is not trying to be everything for every podcaster. David is very direct in that the focus is sales and monetization, not pretending they're a full growth engine. The value they offer is bringing campaigns, cross promos where possible, and keeping deals flexible rather than locking creators into exclusivity. And third, baked-in ads are becoming more important, especially because Spotify's premium video changes can squeeze dynamic ad insertion, and it shapes how they think about monetization going forward. So when you think about that, and you think about the conversation I had with David, hopefully these are some of the things that you walked away with, like myself. Once again, thank you for tuning in. I truly appreciate it. The show is produced by the amazing team at Stories and Strategies. Don't know them? Reach out. I'm using RSS.com for my podcast hosting because podcast hosting is more than just storage. RSS.com provides so many features to ensure a great podcast experience. Northflow is my dedicated podcast management platform, and Cast Magic is the tool I use for content repurposing. As I say, life is about time and relationships. You have no clue where one conversation is going to take you. This is why these conversations I'm able to bring to you. This is why I network for a living. While you're able to tune into these conversations, you have no clue where these conversations are going to take you. So please, I live on LinkedIn. Reach out. I have a newsletter, as we talked about during this show, as discovery for podcasts is incredibly difficult. Tune in every Thursday, and until next time, keep listening. Thanks a lot.